Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this session with Professor Paul Krugman. Most of us do know about Professor Krugman. We've read him. Professor Krugman, in many ways, resembles one of his intellectual heroes, John Maynard Keynes. He's one of the finest theoretical economists around, and he won the 2008 Nobel Prize for his work on new trade theory. Again, like Keynes, he's been a very influential teacher at various universities, and his textbook on international economics is considered to be a classic. And he's also, like Keynes, a very important public intellectual who dives deeply into contemporary issues. Most of us do read his columns for the New York Times and some of his longer pieces for the New York Review of Books. And since he's in India, I think it's also worth mentioning that two of the economists who have been influential as far as Professor Krugman goes are two Indians of economists of Indian origin, which is Avinash Dixit and Jagdish Bhagwati.
Of course.
Yeah. So, Professor Krugman, thanks for coming here. If you could start with the state of the world economy. It's been 8 years since the financial crisis. And 8 years later, the world economy still seems to be limping along. So we've had low growth. Many countries are flirting with deflation, or their inflation is below target. World trade is shrinking. And this is despite extraordinary policy measures such as low interest rates, expansion of central bank balance sheets, increase in public spending. So what went wrong? Why has the world, even 8 years after this recession or after this financial crisis, not recovered fully? And do you think that this is the new normal in a way?
Okay, I am mostly convinced that it is the new normal. And at this point, after all of the, we had a story we told. If in 2009, 2010, the story you might have told was, well, we had this great housing bubble in both the US and Europe. So we had a North Atlantic housing bubble, we had an overextension of finance, and then we had a hangover after the bubble burst. But at this point, the hangover has gone on so long that I think you have to tell a different story, which is that we have chronic weakness, that we have an underlying inadequacy of spending, and that the bubble masked that. The bubble gave us a temporary illusion of sufficient demand, sufficient spending. When the bubble burst, it went away, and that it's not the aftermath of the bubble that's the problem. The problem is something deeper, and that it is secular stagnation, if you like, that there is a fundamental weakness. And we can think of various reasons for that, but I think we do need to say that the preponderance of evidence now says that this is the new normal, that we need to learn to live with a world that does not want to spend enough to keep itself fully employed.
So are there any policy measures you think are needed for the world to get out of what you call this secular stagnation? Because if the global economy stagnates, then even an economy such as India would definitely feel the pain.
That's right. There's no one that can be really insulated. I think one thing we have learned is that it's very difficult for anybody to be completely, to have if you like, prosperity in one country is no longer really much of a possibility. That weakness in Europe gets communicated through a weak euro to the United States. Weakness in the United States gets communicated through financial conditions to developing countries. But in any case, the policies, we need a couple of things. One is that fiscal expansion, all of the concerns about public debt now look really misplaced because in a world of persistent weakness, interest rates are low. Interest rates on public debt in major advanced economies are below growth rates. Even though growth is slow, interest is even lower, which means that debt is really not much of a burden at all. And monetary, the world settled on a 2% target for inflation as the norm, which turns out to have been based upon the view was that 2% inflation was high enough to ensure that prolonged periods of stagnation because you couldn't cut interest rates enough would not happen. Well, that's now empirically just wrong, so a higher inflation target. So if I had if I could do whatever without political constraint, I would say let's have a big burst of fiscal expansion throughout the OECD, get the inflation rate up to 4%, and then let's do a reset from that point. None of this is going to happen, but that's what we should be doing.
It's interesting you calling for a large expansion in fiscal spending. Now, Donald Trump has become, or is set to become the next US president, and I know that politically you disagree with almost everything he stands for. But there seems to be some talk that the Trump administration actually would push for higher infrastructure spending in the US through a large fiscal expansion. We've already seen, and the US Fed may increase interest rates, so tighten monetary policy, loosen fiscal policy. Does that make any sense to you, that sort of strategy?
Okay, I have to say I don't actually believe in the infrastructure component. I mean, or I find it very doubtful. It's what's actually been proposed is a public-private partnership thing that looks to me like a mirage, with very little additionality, very little actual increase in spending. What we are looking at probably are very large tax cuts. If you believe the campaign proposal, we're talking about $4.5 trillion of tax cuts over the next decade. That's, even if you think that's not very effective fiscal stimulus, it doesn't have to be very effective to be a big number. We will be seeing probably significant benefit cuts at the same time, which will be smaller but have a higher multiplier. So the net fiscal impact is unclear, but probably, on balance, we're looking at expansionary fiscal policy, not as part of a strategy just because trying to throw bones to various constituencies. What will end up happening is a fiscal expansion, which is a move in the right direction for all the wrong reasons, but it's a move in the right direction. And to the extent that interest rates go up because the Fed believes now that it's going to be a fiscal expansion, the dollar gets stronger. The U.S. exports some of that expansion to the rest of the world via a stronger dollar. So this is we're getting some of what I've been calling for, although I think if you try to really do the numbers, it's not going to be remotely enough. I mean, the United States might be doing a fiscal expansion of 2% of GDP, which would be good, but it's going to be a low effectiveness fiscal expansion because it was mostly tax cuts for the wealthy, and that will be a uniquely U.S. thing. So if we're looking at the world economy as a whole, it's really a fiscal expansion that's just a fraction of a percent of GDP, and it's not enough to fundamentally change the story.
But you do expect a switch in the U.S. Macro strategy? Yeah.
The U.S. fiscal austerity was not the product of a sincere concern about debt, right? That was all hypocritical. We had fiscal austerity because Republicans were against anything that President Obama was for. And now that we will have unified government, it will be in a position that they will suddenly discover they don't care about debt and deficits. And they're in a position to do what they want, which is to cut taxes for the wealthy. So we will have a change in U.S. Fiscal stance.
So one of the concerns which people in India would have about this new political culture in Europe and America, and Donald Trump is part of that, is the response to the global trading system, because India has been in the past 25 years one of the beneficiaries of open trade. So do you expect that the Donald Trump administration would actually walk the talk in the wrong way perhaps, but on its talk about bringing jobs back home or immigration, etc.?
I'm very uncertain. If this were a halfway rational incoming government, what would happen would be that they would float the idea of basically undoing global trade agreements, and people from State Department, U.S. Trade Representative's office would brief the president-elect on what that would mean and the consequences, and it would not happen. This guy who by all accounts is unwilling to sit still for more than 3 minutes for anything. Who is going to explain to him that this can't happen? And you say, well, yes, but his inner circle of economic advisors will but then we look at those people and we say, well, wow, who's going to? So I don't know. All kinds of strange things may happen. If I were, however, if I were a developing country government, I would look at this week and be slightly encouraged, because it looks as if what Trump is likely to want is highly public spectacles that have almost no substance to them. So we've just had a several days news cycle dominated by 1,000 jobs, carrier plant in Indiana, 1,000 jobs in the United States, right? That's as somebody said, in fact, in the state of Indiana itself, during the time that Trump will take to fly to Indiana and back, they will have lost 6,000 jobs from other sources. So this is, if he's going to be focusing on things that make good television but have almost no real economic impact, that may mean that the whole protectionism thing will be lots of huffing and puffing and photo opportunities and nothing real. That, I think, from your point of view, should be the hopeful. From my point of view, God help us, America's descending into insanity. But in terms of substantive economic policy, that's what you should be hoping for.
Okay. Thank you. Just to shift to our part of the world, China. Now, that's another trouble spot in a way, and nobody quite knows what the actual state of the Chinese economy is. The growth has slowed down, but there's all this debate about the state of its financial system, shadow banking. What is your assessment of China? Because India gets affected. It's obviously a very major trade partner for India, as well as through the impact on commodity prices. It's a major impact on India. So what's your assessment of the Chinese economy? So
I would say that China is probably, actually rather oddly, China is the same problem that's afflicting the OECD, except it's that problem on steroids. It's a vastly exaggerated one. China has a unsustainably high investment rate, very low productivity investment at this point. It used to be sustainable because China had, in effect, very favorable demographics, not only growing working age population, but shifting people out of the rural areas into the modern sector, which is pretty much over, so it can't continue on its previous growth model. The scale of the adjustment that would be required, it's something like you'd need to go from investment of 50% of GDP to investment of 30% of GDP. How do you do that without a massive recession? And they've been papering it over with this extreme rapid growth of very low quality credit, which then is just setting up another bomb. Now, I have to admit, I've been predicting a crisis in China for about 4 years now, and it keeps not happening. So, but at some point, my old teacher, Rudy Dornbush, used to say, crises take longer to happen than you can possibly imagine, and then when they happen faster than you can possibly imagine. So China still looks to me like something ready to blow up, and with a government that does not seem to be especially into listening to potential bad news. It seems like a government that wants to hear what it wants to hear and cracks down on people who tell it uncomfortable truths, kind of like the government we're about to have in America. So it's not good.
So you had actually, in a way, predicted the 1997 Asian crisis. You were
not true.
Yeah. Well, okay. One of the people who had at least waved the red flag, so to say. So you think China could be headed for that sort of problem?
Yeah. In some ways, China. First of all, China's underlying problem is, in a way, similar to the kinds of things that I did worry about in the 90s, which was that the underlying sources of long-term growth are drying up. China has been a growth model through really not so much through efficiency. There's been some of that, obviously, but a lot of it is just mobilizing resources, and that's reaching its limit. And then on top of that, you have the macro, the demand side adjustment that is required that China so far shows no sign of being ready to do. So China looks, I think, and in some ways, if I have to say, the macroeconomics of China looks more to me like Japan at the end of its bubble in the 80s than it does like the Asian crisis, 97, 98. But it's Japan without the political stability and social cohesion. So it's a pretty worrisome prospect.
So the sense one gets is that both America and China, the two biggest economic powers, they seem to be in some spot of trouble. So over the next 5 years, would it be fair to say that you don't have too many hopes of a rebound in global economic growth? That's
right. I would say, the United States has just taken a very strange turn. China looks pretty scary. And on the other hand, Europe is a mess, right? We're waiting. We're going to have a vote in Italy on Sunday, which could very well lead to a euro crisis. We could very easily be looking at President Le Pen in France next year. So it's now. Actually, one thing I do need to say, though, the U.S. I don't see a short-run macro crisis in the U.S. If anything, policy is going to be switching to an expansionary direction. So you always want to bear in mind that extremely unwise long-run policy doesn't necessarily carry a short-run cost. Economics is not a morality play. You can have a very bad guy doing stuff that is going to be catastrophic a generation from now. That, unfortunately, if you like, does not, or fortunately, but anyway, that does not necessarily bring a recession this year. And so I'm actually not, I don't think the United States is going to be a drag on the world economy in the next year or two. China is a very different story. China, if things blow up, is going to be a drag on the world.
So this is perhaps the right time to switch to India because, India is inextricably linked to the world economy. The Indian economic model has largely been driven by domestic demand, unlike, say, China's export-led growth or even the Asian countries before that. Given the fact that the world economy is going to sort of have a turbulent time, do you think it makes sense for India to continue with this, which has been a bit strange in economic history because most other small open economies have exported their way to success?
Well, I mean, India has been domestic. It has not been a country that runs large surpluses, but it has opened up dramatically, and that's been fairly critical. And it does depend upon being able to export. In particular, India's it's a new story with the service exports. And now I think, sure, India should count itself fortunate that it's not a major trade surplus country, that nobody, Donald Trump went out there attacking China, attacking Mexico. India didn't actually warrant a mention, and that you should be glad of that. India is not an obvious flashpoint. That said, if you actually ask, I mean, I think we have sort of reached, we've reached a plateau in world trade in manufactured goods. It doesn't look like that big process of rapidly growing manufactured exports is probably over. But services is potentially still a rapid growth area. And what happens if people, in fact, there are already more white-collar jobs, clerical jobs in the United States being lost to India than people realize. It's less visible than factories closing. What happens if that becomes a hot-button issue in the West? And that's something you should be worried about.
The other thing is that as China readjusts its economy, and one of the parts of this strategy to switch to higher domestic consumption is increasing wage rates. There's a lot of hope that some of the low-value manufacturing would shift to India. Do you see that, or do you see some the way? How will this unfold?
I don't think that India is first in line there. I mean, actually, I've been looking at the original. If we're looking at apparel, which is the sort of classic low-wage, labor-intensive sector, that's been shifting quite rapidly to Bangladesh, and maybe India, some of it. India does have some low-wage manufacturing possibilities, but there's a number of countries that are in that potential pool. And as I said, Bangladesh is already there, Vietnam. I think I still think India it's more likely that services, we've been talking a lot about the possible rapid growth of service outsourcing, and it still hasn't fully materialized. But if it does, then India is the likely place. So maybe, yes, some labor-intensive manufacturing, but I'm not sure I would see that as an Indian destiny especially.
So you think that domestic demand as well as export of services would be the more viable economic model?
Yes, although for the most part, that's not a decision that needs to be made. That's something that you leave up to the market. You have the basic framework there. I might also add that India still has big problems with transportation infrastructure. Yeah. And that's a big problem for manufacturing and less so for services, which is one reason for the direction of growth.
To again move to an area which we have written about, which is the rise of robots, and in a way I could link it to India. Recently, I read somewhere the Deputy Prime Minister of Singapore saying that India is battling on two fronts. It has the battle against demography, because 10 million new jobs have to be created every year, and it's a battle against the rise of the robots, which is displacing labor. So how serious is this new manufacturing technology based on robotics as for employment generation, for distribution?
Oh, okay. I would actually say in terms of manufacturing, I know the U.S. better, and we can do that. For the U.S., we've seen it's already happened. We used to have a quarter of the workforce in manufacturing. It's now 12%. And that is not because all the jobs have gone overseas. If you look at in constant prices, the share of manufacturing and output is the same as it was. It's all because of more rapid productivity growth in manufacturing than in the rest of the economy. So in a way, we've already seen the manufacturing jobs go away, and there's not that much more to be lost in manufacturing. Manufacturing employment, by the way, as a share of total, is down almost everywhere. So now maybe there's some more, but I think the real question we want to ask is how many service jobs are at risk of going away. If we think about what big data, primitive artificial intelligence can actually do, though the places that are most at risk are what we might think of as relatively routine office jobs. And that can be a very big deal for everybody, including India. But yes, now it's funny because we don't actually see it in the numbers, right? Productivity growth is actually way down, not up. But that may be just a temporary pause.
So I'll just take a couple of questions. This is from Mr. N.K. Singh, who is one of our most distinguished economic policymakers. Assuming that we are entering a period of secular stagnation, will nations compete through competitive devaluations? Do you foresee that as as economic growth internally slows down, people try to devalue their currencies to get foreign demand would kick in?
There's some possibility there, although in a world of highly mobile capital, you can't really separate currency policy from monetary policy. And since we already have monetary policy pretty much pedal to the metal, pretty much, I'm not sure how much additional we can see by way of competitive devaluations. What's interesting, the case that everyone talked about a lot was China holding the renminbi weak. Yeah. But that's already well in the rearview mirror. At this point, China is supporting the renminbi against capital flight, and I'm not sure that there's a whole lot more in that direction that's going to be the problem. I think currency wars is the last war. That's not the war we're going to be fighting right now.
Some people do get concerned about this issue of competitive devaluation, and there have been calls for some sort of a plaza accord all over again, where people basically sit around the table and fix the currencies. So do you think that's any sort of likelihood?
No. Two reasons. One is that it's not clear what are we agreeing. Actually, three things. One was even the Plaza Accord. It's not clear whether that really changed things as opposed to just ratifying something that was already in process. Second is you need some agreement on what it is that's supposed to be happening. Whose currency needs to be weakened here? In Plaza, there was an agreement that the dollar was too strong. I'm not sure at all that there's an agreement. And finally, given the current crop of leaders in major economies, hard to kind of envision them cooperating on anything. I mean, can you just imagine a summit of Trump and Xi, and then I guess an empty chair for Europe because there's nobody in charge? And what is that all about?
So another question is obviously about the big issue of the day in India, and perhaps a lot of economists across the world. Ken Rogoff wrote about this. I think Stiglitz wrote about this. What is your take on demonetization in India? And do you foresee gains for the Indian economy because of this?
Wow. Okay. So it's unusual, I think, would be the word for the policy. What's interesting is there is a really good case that high denomination banknotes are a bad thing in the modern world. There really should not be a 500 euro note. There should not be a 1,000 franc note. These are, even a $100 bill are fundamentally serve no legitimate purpose. But that's not what happened here. We're talking about even taking into account that this is a low-wage economy where denominations that don't look big by advanced country standards are fairly, but a 2,000 rupee note is not particularly outrageous, and of course the denomination is not being eliminated. This is just a one-time, you need to cash this thing in as an attempt to flush out illicit hoards. I understand the motivation here, the thing that people were concerned about, but it does seem like a highly disruptive way to deal with it. Now, it's hard to see that there are significant long-run gains from it. There's certainly significant, although temporary, costs. And then, when it's all passed, a year from now, things will be pretty much the same as they were, as far as I can make out.
There is a hope that this sort of exogenous shock would change behavior, that Indians who usually go below the tax radar would be forced to pay taxes, or at least encouraged to pay taxes, and therefore the sort of fiscally constrained state may have the revenues to build infrastructure, public services.
Well, maybe, but I'd be happy to be proved wrong, but I would think that actually there will be some permanent change in behavior. People will be more careful and more sophisticated about their money laundering in the future, so that they'll be protected from the next time this happens.
So there are lots of questions on demonetization, quite expectedly, but could you suggest some other alternatives? Means, have countries dealt with such challenges in other ways? Because this is quite unprecedented.
I guess I'm a little bit of basically a pessimist here, in the sense that a relatively low-income economy where a lot of it is still quite unsophisticated is not going to be a place where income taxes are easily collected. I mean, income taxes in general are problematic. Basically income tax collections are effective, and tax evasion relatively limited in certain advanced countries. Not even in all advanced countries, right? So in quite a few advanced countries, there's substantial evasion, so the United States has historically been successful, but give us a couple more years of the age of Trump, and the United States may cease to do that as well, and the developing countries, by and large, do rely upon direct taxation. It's still, and even countries that have high rate, I was thinking about it. There are some developing countries that have quite high tax receipts as a share of GDP. Brazil. But it's not because they're effective at collecting income tax, it's because they have high levels of VAT and other forms of direct taxation, which admittedly they're relatively regressive taxes, but if they're used to finance progressive transfer programs, then the net effect is still redistributive. And I suspect that is the root, that trying to have an OECD-style income tax system in a country which is so far below OECD levels of per capita GDP is probably not, in the end, a doable task.
Okay. There's a question here, if you want to answer this. If you were the finance minister of India, what would be a couple of things you would do that could be game changers?
Oh, I don't know enough at all about the country to do that. No, I mean, it's what I can say, look, over the years, I've been involved with some country consulting and so on, and always had somebody who was a tax expert, not because I'm not. And what they always would do is they would talk about ways to get the kinds of taxation that work in developing countries, which tend to be VAT-like, they tend to be indirect taxation, to enhance the effectiveness of those things, not go after objectives that are just premature for that level, and then look at, we know that you can do a lot about poverty reduction. We've seen some developing countries, again, Brazil under the, now they're having a political crisis, but they were actually very effective at poverty reduction under the previous government, under Lula, and that was done through more or less conventional fiscal tools. So I think those are the things you can do.
Okay. So just to circle back to where we started on the state of the global economy and the global system, you mentioned that the rise of populist parties in Europe as well as what's happened in America. We've had a liberal international order after 1945, and obviously in 73 there was changes in the exchange rate system, but nevertheless this order has been there for many decades. Do you see this under threat now? Means overall this system of international cooperation?
Yes, I mean, it's under threat. How far it goes is a really is very much up in the air. I mean, we built a system that was startlingly effective. I mean, trade policy in particular is a remarkable example of an international system of rules that enforced through through agreements that has been surprisingly durable. Steady progress through trade rounds, but then also remarkably little backsliding between rounds. Even the Great Recession and its aftermath produced remarkably little protectionist surge. But all of that is contingent on first of all, some sense that once you have a rule in place, you don't violate it. The existence of a policy establishment that strongly appreciated the consequences of ripping up the rule book. To a certain extent, U.S. hegemonic leadership. All of those things are now in question. And what happens if you get to the point where major players are led by people who have no familiarity with, no sympathy for that elite consensus? If you have, if there's no clear hegemonic leader for the global system, you can find people who are political international relations theorists who did argue that there was something very, very special about the post-war couple of generations, and that maybe those conditions are past. So I guess we're going to test those limits in the near future. And yes, it's certain that anyone who thinks that the path of globalization and liberal order is monotonic, that's not what history tells us. And so maybe we're headed for another kind of interwar period where a lot of things that we took for granted as features of the world order just go away.
So do you think countries like India and China have a special responsibility to protect this global system from which they have benefited?
Yes. Particularly, if we do our suffering, look, we did have, whether it was really crucial or not, we certainly did have a U.S. as hegemon for a long period. The U.S. is no longer either big enough or emotionally inclined to serve as a benevolent hegemon. We were saying, if you'd asked me 10 years ago, I'd said, well, okay, but we go from a situation of a U.S. hegemony to a sort of joint U.S.-European hegemony that preserves the system. But now Europe has I mean, it's been kind of a competition between the U.S. and Europe as to who can go off the rails faster. And until a few weeks ago, I would have said Europe was winning, but okay. So now what you're left with are the big developing country players, which are now big enough. China is certainly up there in the same order as the U.S. and the European Union as a player. China certainly has a responsibility to try and maintain the system. India, not quite so much, but India is still a big player. So yes, if we're going to hold this thing together, it's going to require no more free riding on U.S. hegemony, not in this world. It's got to be developing countries that hold it together.
One last question. It's a broad brush question. Yeah. How do you assess India's economic prospects, say, over the next 1 or 2 decades?
Okay. Now, I have no real sense of what's likely to happen in the political economies, but you know, India has India is in some ways, I mean, there are enormous differences, but India still in some important ways looks like China with a 15 or 20-year lag. That is, it's a country that is still well behind the technological frontier, but now has a demonstrated ability to do significant convergence. It's a country that's turned out to have reserves of entrepreneurial vigor, it has the overall level of education is not good, but there is a significant reserve of educated people. To the extent that we are talking about growing service trade, the fact that the use of English is widespread is a big factor. So India looks like it has lots of potential, and it has not yet hit the kind of demographic wall that China is hitting. So India ought to be a high prospect economy. There may be something that we're missing. There may be issues of politics, and of course we don't know what the global system is going to do. But if I had to say where is I think the China story, I think we've seen, you know, I don't know whether China is going to just slow down or something worse, but China is clearly slowing down. So if you ask where is there a big economy with a lot of upside, it would be India.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Krugman, for your thoughts on a wide range of subjects, and I hope the audience also enjoyed it. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.